really thrilled to see so many new and old friends joining us via Zoom. And then also, I know some folks are joining us via Facebook. Really glad to have you here on a sunny Saturday in March. I just had a happy anniversary email from Howard and Laura, who were there with us at the auction 4 years ago. Next Wednesday, March 17th, is the fourth anniversary of the auction where we bought Agraria. And it's a really exciting time for us to reflect on that time, as well as our organizational history, because we actually have a double anniversary this year. It's the fourth year of Agraria, or fourth anniversary, and the 80th anniversary of our parent organization, the Arthur Morgan Institute for Community Solutions. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the flow of the day. First of all, this is part of a longer Growing Green conference that we're hosting in partnership with Tecumseh Land Trust as part of their Jacoby Watershed project. So really happy to have Lauren Jessing and Krista McGaw here as co-hosts of today's session. There's one more session online next week as part of that conference, and then also a face-to-face tour of Agraria on Earth Day that will be part of the Growing Green conference. So really thrilled to have both Krista and Lauren here with us. Also with us are our presenters from Agraria, our staff and partners. After I speak, Alex Klug, who is our Food and Farm Program Manager, will be talking a little bit about the food and farm projects at Agraria. Then Ariella Brown, who is our Black Farming Lead, will be talking about that project. Then we'll have Jason Ward, who is our farmer, talk about the work that he's done on Agraria and in the broader region. And then finally, we'll have Sherry Chen, who's an important partner for us in Springfield, talk about her work in Springfield. And I also want to give a shout out to Rachel Isaacson, who's doing all the amazing work behind the scenes today. She's really been an amazing supporter of our transition to online. And as most of you know, the first sessions of Growing Green we did in person. Last year we had to cancel literally at the very last minute. And so although we're not in person this week, we're very happy to be welcoming people from our region and from beyond. So thank you for being here. All right, I'm just going to do a brief introduction about what Agraria is and what Community Solutions is. So Alex, if you would go to the first slide. So this gentleman here is Arthur Morgan. He is the person who founded Community Solutions, then Community Service, in 1940. It was right on the eve of the United States entrance into World War II. So it was a time that was sort of eerily reminiscent of what's happening now. Not that we are entering a world war, but essentially this huge shift in humanity happening at the time that he started Community Service. And the reason he founded the organization is he was really concerned about the push toward urbanization and globalization really being a challenge for democracy and community sovereignty. So he founded the organization with a focus on the small community. He wrote many books, including this small community you see on the right-hand side of the screen, The Foundation of Democratic Life. And over the last 80 years, the organization has gone through several iterations, published more books, and also done some films, including The Power of Community, How Cuba Survived Peak Oil about a decade ago. And that was not necessarily the beginning of, but a precursor to our interest in agriculture in general. So next slide, Alex. So as I was mentioning, 4 years ago, we bought this farm at auction, 128 acres at that point on the outskirts of Yellow Springs. Krista McGaw did an amazing job of involving community people and helping to think about the farm, which was part of the green belt around Yellow Springs that the village wanted to preserve as farmland. So Krista really did a great job of organizing people to try to preserve it. And the picture in the upper left-hand corner of the group that were at the auction, there were other people on this call who were also at that auction. It was a very exciting time 4 years ago. And then in the bottom, you'll see 2 years ago at an annual meeting, we actually were able to award founders of Agraria to kind of recognition to all the people who stood with us then. We bid about $700,000 on the farm, but we had very little in the bank. So we had to raise money quickly, and we had a lot of people come together and who have still come together to help us buy Agraria. And I have to say that one of the most exciting things for us is just this community input, which continues to this day. We would not be where we are without the amazing volunteers and supporters that we have. Again, many of whom are on this call, so good to have you here. Next slide, Alex. So our interest in regenerative agriculture, which is the focus today, really came out of our organizational interest in climate change. And I noticed Glenn Gall is on the call. He was on our board actually when we bought Agraria, and we had an interest in carbon sequestration in soil because we felt that that was at that point, it's changed quite a bit now, but at the time that we became interested in soil in 2016, it really was an under-researched and under-reported climate tool. And most of you probably know that agriculture is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. There's estimates that up to 50% of our emissions are from agriculture and then the way we transport food. And Ohio, as you know, is agriculture is our #1 industry. Much of that is corn and soy. So crops that are generally grown in a way that produces greenhouse gas emissions and doesn't sequester carbon. Next slide. And then the other issue, as you know, with a lot of agriculture, the way it's done today is our algal blooms and dead zones in Lake Erie and also the Gulf of Mississippi. In fact, the Miami River is the second largest contributor of nitrogen to the Gulf of Mississippi. So we have lots of issues that are arising out of the way that we do agriculture. Next slide. So these are the principles of regenerative agriculture. And interestingly, although regenerative ag is really kind of a new term for many people, these core principles were actually the soil health principles put together by the NRCS in the 1920s. So they're actually, they've been around a while. And there's also a lot of indigenous roots, indigenous thinking in the principles of regenerative agriculture. And these are all principles that we are modeling or hope to model at Agraria, keeping the soil covered through things like cover crops, making sure that there's lots of diversity above and below ground, and integrating livestock, which we hope to do very soon. Next slide. So these are some of the visions of what we'd like to do at Agraria. This is a drawing by Bob Houston, one of our amazing volunteers, showing some of the various projects that we have envisioned or are doing on Agraria. And again, today's mostly focused on agriculture, but I thought it was important to at least show you that we're doing more things than growing. So go ahead, Alex. So one of the most important things that we're doing is education, both on farm and off. And these are just a sampling of some of the things that we're doing right now. We have an Agraria journal that we have published the last couple of years. We have a few more editions coming out this year. It's been a great way for us to get the word out about what we're doing and regenerative agriculture in general. The bottom left-hand corner, it's not that easy to see, but essentially that is a snapshot of the educators' resources in our from our podcast, our new podcast series funded by the Ohio Council for the Humanities. We just published our 3rd podcast on agroforestry. And it's a great podcast, but what I'm almost more excited about is that we have some amazing humanities scholars who are putting together questions for educators so that can be used in the classroom in both K-12 and college classrooms. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see our friend Marcus Nagel, who also I think is on this call, and he is one of our many partners at Central State University in education and research. And then in the bottom right, you'll see kids programming, and I don't have enough time to explain all the wonderful kids programming that's going on. But we have a lot, both K to 12 through the classroom, but then also kids coming on site with families or for after school. And you can check out our website for more information about any of these projects. Next slide. So this is just an infographic that's been put together for our new journal. Rose Hardesty, whom some of you may know from an Antioch grad who recently joined us to help with social media, put together this graphic, but it just gives a sense of the different kinds of things that we have going on at Agraria and through Agraria now. In terms of education, in terms of food access, which Alex will speak about, and then also in terms of conferences. And I did actually want to just mention our next conference. Next slide, Alex. Conferences have been really signature events. We've had, I think, over 100 conferences and workshops since the organization was founded. It's a signature part of Community Solutions. And over the last few years, we've upped our online presence, obviously, and also broadened our focus a little bit beyond soil and beyond community solutions, typical areas of focus. And so just a note, a couple of the conferences this year are a Nourishing Life conference, which is with a focus on nutrition and the connection of soil health to human health. And you can see we have some pretty stellar speakers, Vandana Shiva, who many of you know, but also Christine Jones, who is an Australian soil scientist, and some amazing physicians and nutritionists. And so it's actually a free conference. We're going to be funding it through sponsorship. So please check out our website if it looks interesting to you. We also have a couple other conferences. Ariella will speak about our Black Farmers Conference, but we have a Pathways to Regeneration conference with a focus on water also in November. And I have about 10 seconds left. The other thing that's happening this year as to kind of honor our 80th anniversary is in collaboration with Antioch College on October 14th and 15th. We'll be hosting an Arthur Morgan retrospective, since we feel like his legacy is now maybe more important than ever. So thank you. And on to Alex Klug. Oh, sorry. I wanted to give a shout out to our amazing staff. If you don't mind going back up, sorry. This was our staff as of Christmas last year, and we just really have an extraordinary staff, and I just wanted to give a shout out to them, including Alex. Okay, now on to Alex.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Alex Klug. I'm the Food and Farm Program Manager at Agraria. I've been with the group for about almost 2 years, about a year and a half. I started as an AmeriCorps Vista, and I'm now really excited to be here and to talk to all of you sort of about what Agraria is doing for the regional food system, and then also talk a little bit about our on-site farm production. So I'm going to start off today just by quickly going over sort of where we're at with the global food system. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with processes work, but I thought that this visual really kind of helped describe sort of what some of the challenges are, and really where globalized food system work becomes really vulnerable for us. So just take a minute and look at this. You know, we've got a crop is grown and then it's shipped to a country, and then it can be shipped to another country. And in short, it's shipped all over the world to different distribution centers, really before it hits the shelves of your supermarket and really ends up on your table at home. So we can see here, because of the systems of players, there's so many places for us to feel vulnerable to where food is coming from. And so in the bottom right, it kind of explains, you know, panic is often associated only with the end result of where food is. So that supermarket customer relationship. And I think COVID really opened a lot of our eyes up to that this year. with the toilet paper and just the lack of access some of us had to different needs that we have, consumer goods. So we're realizing that by the further away we are from where our food is grown, the less control we have over it, and that can be a really scary thing, regardless of your income. And so one concept that Susan really spoke to me about a little bit this year, and it really kind of opened my own eyes up to it, was you can be food insecure no matter how wealthy you are. If you don't have a connection to where your food comes from, if you don't grow it yourself, it doesn't really matter how much money you have, you can lose access to food very quickly. And I'd add into the issues that this infographic brings up. It says borders can close, staff can fall sick, and there can be disruption at ports. I'd add to that really a lot of what we're losing in these systems is the cultural identity we have with our food. So when we talk about access and sovereignty, food is a very cultural thing. And when we suddenly break those bonds with the land and where food is produced, we're really losing a lot of what it means in our own personal identity. So what does a good food system look like? I like this one because this kind of breaks down for us all of those different impact areas. So there are 4 really primary impact areas. We have economic, social, nutritional, and ecological. And for those of you who've heard of the slow food movement, it's something that can be addressed in a circular economy and with resilient food systems. It's really looking at how we can invest our money back into the farmers in our communities and back into those ecosystem services that can help benefit us. So we're seeing the economic area cover the local economy. The social issues really can be encapsulated as ethic and inclusive food business models, food and cultural heritage, nutrition as healthy and sustainable diets, and then the ecosystem work is biodiversity, seasonality, and organic food, water and land management, food footprints, and food loss and food waste. And for those of you who were with the conference last week, I think John Eichert said something that was really profound to me, and it had a really big impact because he said, I'm not advocating that we're going back to provincial food production systems. So, we're not going back to horse-drawn carriages and we're not trying to go back pre-industrialization, but what we are trying to do is really go back to those philosophies. So going back to building the relationship with your farmer, knowing the whole supply chain that your food goes through, and really trying to bring it a little bit closer to home. So what's Agraria doing on site to help support this kind of work? The first thing obviously is production. So we are actively producing food now, going into our 4th year. I think Susan just said we're about to hit our anniversary. So looking at, what are we doing on site to produce food? This is a really quick explanation of what a food forest is. I'm sure some of you are familiar, but you've got 7 layers of a food forest. So you've got your upper canopy, low tree layer, shrub layer, herbaceous layer, the soil surface layer, and your root layer. And then finally your vertical layer, which are those climbers. So this is what this food forest looks like for us right now. In this bottom left-hand corner, you can actually see the place at Agraria where it will be. And I love the location they picked for this because it's going to be one of many food forests, but this one's actively being developed right now. And so it's right when you first pull into our campus. It's right in the front parking lot. So when we've got those kids jumping out of the cars, they can run over and kind of interact with this space. And that's, again, really rebuilding that connection, that relationship we have to where our food grows. And I don't know if you can see on this image, I tried to put the acreage, but I think it's about 0.2 acres. So it's about 1/5 of an acre. And it's really important to know that because food doesn't need to be, we don't need a huge amount of space to produce enough food for our family or for ourselves. It really can be done in a small space with a small footprint. So you can see in this image, the planting plan Sinuan created is that we do have the majority of those layers covered. Obviously the maple, hackberry, we've got our upper story, hazelnuts, plums kind of getting lower. And then looking at the serviceberry, sweet shrub thicket is coming into that herbaceous layer. And you will notice we don't have the lower layers in yet, and that's very intentional. We want to get some of these bigger plants established first and then start to move down into the ground because we wouldn't want to disturb some of the smaller layers as we're putting these in. So we will put in the vines and the roots probably in a year or so. So all of this, for those of you who are in the area, definitely come by this summer and check it out. We should be planting most of this this spring. So it should be starting to get installed here soon. And then moving into another production space we have, this is our perennial planting space. And so coming back to what Susan had a slide earlier that talked about those really the principles of regenerative agriculture. And so when we're looking at perennial gardening, part of why this is so important is that oftentimes food crops are annuals. And when we can shift a little bit more toward the perennial system, what we're doing is we're really allowing those regenerative principles to shine. So we're really allowing those roots to stay in the ground year round. The soil remains covered, and you're really building the soil health by incorporating these plants, because when you're not having the annuals every year where you're going in and possibly tilling or pulling them up and disturbing the soil, you're really allowing the whole system to regenerate itself while you can be fairly hands-off. And to that point about being fairly hands-off, there's an interesting and another really important philosophy we have with these spaces is that all of these, for those of you who've grown berries, immediately this is like a bird's dream right here. And so one of the initiatives we do like to have on site is all of this space will be fenced in and netted, so we will be able to protect it from the other species on site. But we do want to make sure that we are accountable for planting for other species and making sure they do have food. So Gabby let me know before I came in today that we do have over 400 elderberry and blackberry species on site that have been planted and maintained just for birds. So they have their food and we have ours. This is a nice slide we have on site. So in the top left corner, you've got Gabby Lumasamray, that person I was just speaking about. She's giving a really nice tour here of our staff garden. So the staff garden is a very, very small, intimate space on our front campus, where staff can come out and garden. So we all have the opportunity to grow our own food. And I think that speaks pretty nicely to the culture of Agraria and sort of the culture of our workplace, and that, we don't just discuss these principles, but we are really promoted and we are really supported to take advantage of them and learn on site when we can. The top left is our older hoop house. So we've had that for about 2 or 3 years. That was built with a workshop. So probably a lot of people on this call actually helped build that one. Lisa Helm from Dayton Urban Grown led that workshop, and they put it together, I think, in the course of a weekend. So that's been a great asset for us. It's allowed us to start a lot of seeds and keep our plants going, season extension into the winter. So that's been a really nice space. In the bottom left corner, we have Meredith, who is one of our previous education specialists, planting garlic with a little one. That was a really nice day we did in November of this past year, where we did our first big garlic crop. And I was out earlier this week, and we can start to see the scapes popping up. So I'm really excited to harvest that this year. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a very nice new project going in. It's our 30 by 6 foot. A growing space again for season extension. That project was supported through one of the NRCS EQIP grant programs. So for those of you who might have production spaces on site or want to become involved in this, definitely check out EQIP. It's a really good cost share program that allows you to offset a little bit of your environmental footprint while continuing production. So they do actually help pay for different projects that can both support your business or just support your site. So that's part of our EQIP funding, and we've made a little bit more progress on that hoop house since the picture was taken. So we do have our end walls and baseboards in, and we will be getting the plastic up here in the next few weeks. So definitely, if you're interested in helping, let us know and come out and check it out when it's done. And then this next slide kind of bleeds into the other part of our EQIP program. So we were funded last year for 2 different projects, the first being that hoop house, and the second you can see in this big picture in the top row on the left. Those little yellow squares and shapes you see out there are called paddocks. And so what this demonstrates is rotational grazing. We will be putting this system in going into this year. Jason Ward, who'll be speaking here soon, will probably explain this a little bit more, but just so for everyone who's not familiar, rotational grazing is a really important grazing practice, and it's so essential to having regenerative agriculture. You really on site, cows in the past few years with climate change really have gotten a bad rap, but it's not the use of livestock themselves, it's the way that they're managed. And so what this type of practice promotes is rotational grazing, in that you are cycling nutrients throughout the entire system. What you'll do is you'll let your animals sit in one of those yellow shapes for a matter of hours or up to a day or two. Once they graze that thoroughly, you then move them on to the next one and continue that cycle all the way through. And what that allows is you're never overgrazing any one of those sites. So all of the plants in that system have an opportunity to regenerate, again, coming back down into drawing nutrients through their roots. And the animals are always getting the most nutrient dense food possible. So they're not grazing the grass when it's this little, they're really getting that really nutrient rich food supply. Looking at this picture in the bottom left, I love this one because part of what we're doing with our rotational grazing system is putting that in first, and then we'll be expanding it into a silvopasture system. So silvopasture is incorporating trees into these spaces. So you've still got your animals grazing on site, you've got a nice forage crop, and then you've got a tree crop as well. And you can see that in the bottom right picture. We'll be starting with goats and then moving up to cattle in the coming years. But coming back to that photo on the bottom left, I love this photo because since we've been talking about silvopasture and incorporating this on site, we've been getting a lot of questions, of like, how old is that practice? Where does it come from? And what I really want to highlight is that, as Susan said earlier, most of these things, these are not new practices. These have been around for centuries and generations. And it was really only since industrial agriculture that we started to move away from a lot of these systems. And so I love this photo because it does highlight just how old a lot of these practices are. And they've been successfully managed for hundreds of years. And then finally on this slide, the top right picture is really new. We just moved our chickens out of our perennial garden and up into this space. You can't quite see the chickens because they think they were hiding from me when I went to take the picture, but it's a really nice space. We consider them tree range chickens now. So it's similar to that concept of silvopasture where the chickens are into a space that has both trees, understory plantings, and they just love it. They're able to really regenerate the soil with their own waste and just walking throughout it. They keep weeds down, and it's just a really fun system to work with. And so that white fence around there is a light electric fence, so it will give you a little shock, but yeah, it's a very, very cool practice, and the chickens seem very happy there. And then finally, talking a little bit more about our food system work. There's a lot of different photos on here that I'm going to try to touch on. The first two are just the programs that we highlight. So we've been we've been promoting the SNAP program through the Yellow Springs Farmers Market for the past few years. So there's specific equipment that you need to be able to accept SNAP cards. And SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It formerly was known as food stamps. And that allows lower income people the opportunity to really access with a little bit amount of money, healthy foods. And so they can go out and buy groceries that are supposed to be, healthy for them. The Produce Perks program came around more recently, and that's a complement to the SNAP program. And what Produce Perks does is it does directly target healthy foods. And so if you come to the farmer's market and you're a SNAP user, what we will do is we will match dollar for dollar any amount you want to spend on fruits and vegetables, which can include juices as well. We will match that dollar with another dollar for you to get nutritious foods. So it's a really great program. I should have looked up earlier how many folks we served before this past year, but we do give out, on an average weekend, hundreds of dollars for fresh fruits and vegetables. So in that top left corner is Rachel, who's our wonderful events coordinator who did a lot of work to get this together today. And for years, she was the lead on that. And so she was out there every weekend, even that cold day in that photo, helping get those benefits out to people. The top center photo is a group that we've been working with, and really I'm eager to support them because I do see them as a leading solution in this area around food system work. So the Gem City Market is the first worker owner owned co-op grocery store in the community. They will be opening here soon, and it's just a fantastic opportunity for a good contingency of people in Dayton to own their own grocery store. And the power behind that really is that when you own it, it's not going to go away. So when we've seen, you know, banks and grocery stores and these really important institutions leave communities, specifically Black communities and low-income communities, that's just not going to happen if the people who live there own it. And so it's a really powerful step for these folks to be able to take back what's so important to them in that concept of food and nutrition and culture. Both the top right and the bottom left are photos of the soup program. And so I'm going to let Sherry, who's speaking a little later, talk about that today. But the reason why we have become big supporters of that is, again, it's an opportunity for people to kind of take back food for themselves. So we've been trying to purchase food directly from farmers in our community and help supply that market with some food, because we do find it really important that everybody has access to healthy food. Bottom center is a photo of one of our great volunteers and supporters, Al, and he was helping out the Generous Gardeners program. It's similar to Victory Gardening that happened around the last war, and he always has an abundant harvest, and so he's been really generous donating that to us, and that food did go back to area pantries and to some folks in some of our neighboring communities. And then in the bottom right, we have Doug Christian, who is the owner of Smaller Footprint Farm, and he was the primary farmer that we purchased food from to give back to these communities. So it's really kind of that closed cycle. Part of the food banking system and hunger relief is that so often what happens is we see folks purchase food from these big corporations to donate back into the community, which is really wonderful to be getting any types of food, especially non-perishables. But what we do need to see is more of a push towards healthier foods back for those communities. I also included this quote from Via Campesina, which is a global agricultural movement. And I just think it really encapsulates what food sovereignty is as a concept. So I did want to read that to you today. It's the right of healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems. So I love the concept of food sovereignty is so important, again, to that cultural movement of food. These are just a couple quick photos. I think I find compost to be incredibly beautiful. I think the colors that you get out of it is just really wonderful. And so we do have a lot of efforts going on in various scales at Agraria to work on composting movements and to really get that end cycle, or the end product of the food waste consumer cycle, kind of closing that system. So we want to take, you know, from production back into the composting system. We want to retain all of those nutrients when possible. If food is going into landfills, it's really not able to complete its cycle. It's not getting those nutrients back to us. And then the last thing I want to touch on, which is great because I just have a few seconds left, is our very exciting, probably the biggest program we have going into this year that we're super enthusiastic about, is our Regenerative Farmer Fellowship. Kat Christian from the Antioch Farm will be leading this with us this year. And so this is an opportunity for us to really engage more beginning farmers on site and to do a training program with them. What I think really sets this program apart from others that happen around the country and in this region is that farming is an expensive practice, and it's really, really hard to get it going from scratch. And if you don't have a family farm, if you're not a generational farmer, it's really hard to start from the ground up. And it's just difficult for folks to be able to take, 6 months out of their work life to take on a new skill and to start a new career. And so what we're doing with this is we will be compensating, we will be providing a stipend for all of these farmers to engage in the practice. And so it'll be a 6-month course that we're starting next month. We are focusing all of the fellows on coming from the BIPOC community. And I just learned today that all of them are female farmers, which I'm very excited about. And this is just a really cool opportunity that we're hoping we can see us do every year. It is a partnership with TNC, Central State University, and it was provided in part through a SARE grant from the USDA. And so ending on that note of education, I'm going to pass it off to Ariella Brown as she talks a little bit about her work with the Black Farming Network Conference.
Thank you so much, Alex, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ariella Brown, and I serve as one of the core committee members for the Black Farmers Conference, as well as convene other Black farming initiatives here at Community Solutions. As you can see, this year's theme will be Black farming, community land, and food sovereignty. But before I talk a little bit more about the conference, I wanted to just bring to your attention that today there are 3.4 million farmers in the United States, and only 45,000 are Black. These numbers are down from 1 million Black farmers a century ago. Black farmland ownership peaked in 1910 at 16 to 19 million acres, which is approximately 14% of total agricultural land. A century later, 90% of that land had been lost. Today, white farmers now account for 98% of those acres. 98%. As I indicated earlier, last September, the Arthur Morgan Institute for Community Solutions, Agraria, hosted the first Black Farming Conference here in Southwest Ohio. We came together as a small group of volunteers to create this platform to not only celebrate our Black farming community, but to also serve as a catalyst for the next generation of Black farmers and take a look at our history of farming in the Black community. In 1920, there were nearly 1 million Black farmers compared to 45,000 today. Community Solutions Agraria, through the creation of the Black Farmers Network, is hoping to be a part of this change, of changing this narrative by helping our local Black and underrepresented farmers by holding quarterly meetings, starting a quarterly Black farming newsletter, and by offering the annual Black Conference, which is a free conference. Last year's conference keynote address was by Dr. Annalisa Cox. And she took us back to pre-Civil War times before Ohio was a state to talk about how Black pioneers cultivated this land, the land of this region. This year's conference keynote address will be Leah Penniman, who is the co-founder of Soulfire Farm and is also the author of Farming While Black. Ms. Penniman is a highly sought after speaker, and we are delighted that she has accepted our invitation to join us this year. So please, you do not want to miss her. As I indicated earlier, our conference theme will be Black farming, community land, and food sovereignty. If this past year has taught us anything, with living through a global pandemic, it is that we as a society need to get back to growing our own food and truly knowing where our food comes from and supporting our local, family, and community farms. The goal of the Black Farmers Network is to create a platform for our Black farming community to network, discuss relevant farming topics, and to gain insight from each other, as well as have a place to connect and obtain resources from each other. Our next network roundtable will be held on April 10th. Our quarterly newsletter will be an extension of the roundtable discussions that will offer grant and funding opportunities, upcoming events happening in the community, as well as a Black farmer feature from our region, and so much more. If you would like to subscribe to our newsletter, please contact us at blackfarmersconferenceoh@gmail.com.
I also put the form in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And this is something that Alex already touched on, but I think it's important for me to just reiterate it just very quickly, especially because of all the great work that Community Solutions is doing. In line with the goals of the Black Farmers Network, Community Solutions has received a generous grant to start a new Black, Indigenous, and People of Color's Beginning Farmers Program that will be led again by Antioch College's former farm manager, Kat Kristen, and she's also the owner of Small Footprint Farm. And it's important to recognize, as Alex indicated, that all 6 of these individuals that are going through this first program are all women of color. They will build upon their individual knowledge and their farming experiences while obtaining 20 hours of training, receive business plan support and technical assistance. And we're hoping that we can receive an update during the Black Farmers Conference from some of the farmers later this year. I want to thank you all again for your support, and we hope to see you at this year's conference, which will be held on Friday, September 10th and Saturday, September 11th. Thank you.